In 67 days, the myth of American naval supremacy in the Persian Gulf was shattered forever. The United States did not just fail to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It launched an operation called Project Freedom, deployed over 15,000 personnel, sent guided missile destroyers into the strait, flew more than 100 aircraft over the waterway, announced to the entire world that it would guide stranded ships to safety, and then, 48 hours later, paused the entire operation and retreated behind a diplomatic press release about progress in negotiations that do not exist. Iran did not just close the most important shipping lane on Earth. Iran held it closed against the full weight of the most expensive military machine in human history, fired cruise missiles and drones at American-flagged vessels during the so-called Freedom Operation, launched small boats against U.S. Navy escorts, and watched as Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed greatest deal-maker in the history of the world, announced that he was standing down on the request of Pakistan. Not on the request of Congress, not on the recommendation of the Joint Chiefs, on the request of Pakistan. The President of the United States asked for Pakistan's permission to stop fighting in a strait that America once claimed to own. Let that sink in. On May 3, 2026, Trump announced Project Freedom, a mission to use American military assets to escort neutral commercial ships out of the Strait of Hormuz. The plan was scant on details. Shipping companies were not consulted. The industry association BIMCO said the overall security situation for shipping was currently unchanged and questioned whether the plan was sustainable. On May 4, the first day of the operation, Iran fired cruise missiles, launched drones, and sent fast attack boats against American-flagged vessels transiting the strait. Admiral Brad Cooper, the CENTCOM commander, confirmed the attacks, stating that U.S. forces used attack helicopters to destroy the small boats and intercept the drones. No American vessels were struck, Cooper claimed. Iran's state media simultaneously reported that a U.S. Navy ship had been hit twice and forced to retreat. CENTCOM denied it. But what matters is not whether a single ship was hit. What matters is that the most powerful navy on Earth launched a freedom of navigation operation in a 34-kilometer-wide strait and was immediately met with cruise missiles, drones, and attack boats from a nation whose military budget is roughly 3% of America's. By May 5th, Trump announced that Project Freedom was paused. 2 ships. That is all the United States Navy, with its 11 carrier strike groups and its $800 billion annual budget, managed to guide through the Strait of Hormuz before the president pulled the plug. 2 ships. How did Iran, a nation under bombardment since February 28, a nation whose supreme leader was assassinated in the opening hours of the war, a nation facing a full naval blockade of its coastline, managed to hold the world's most critical choke point against the most powerful military alliance in modern history for over 2 months? Why has the strait remained at roughly 5% of pre-war shipping traffic, despite every threat, every airstrike, and every ultimatum Washington has delivered? What does it mean that 800 merchant vessels carrying 20,000 crew members remain stranded in the Gulf while the American president tweets about humanitarian gestures? And why are global oil prices still above $100 a barrel, U.S. gas prices at $4.46 a gallon, and the International Energy Agency still calling this the greatest energy security challenge in history? Stay with us, because the answers demolish the comfortable Western assumption that American military power can solve any problem anywhere on Earth. If you want the analysis that the mainstream will not give you, hit the like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now let us break this apart. The backstory begins with a warning that was ignored. In briefings held before the February 28 strikes, the Joint Chiefs of Staff warned President Trump that an attack on Iran could prompt Tehran to close the Strait of Hormuz. Trump acknowledged the warnings but dismissed them, telling his team that Iran would likely capitulate instead of closing the strait. And if it did close the strait, the U.S. military could open it again. Both assumptions have been proven catastrophically wrong. Iran did not capitulate. Iran had in fact been preparing for this exact moment for months. In the 2 weeks before the strikes, from February 15 to 20, Iran tripled its oil export rate and reduced oil storage to minimize the economic vulnerability of a disruption it clearly anticipated. Saudi Arabia attempted similar preemptive moves. War risk insurance premiums for the strait quadrupled before the first bomb fell, rising from 0.125% to between 0.2 and 0.4% of ship insurance value per transit, an increase of $250,000 for very large crude carriers. The market knew what was coming, even if the White House refused to believe it. Within 72 hours of the first American bombs falling on Tehran, the IRGC broadcast its VHF radio warning across every frequency in the Gulf. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. On March 4th, the closure was formalized, and America has not been able to reopen it. The Iranian strategy for controlling the strait was not a single dramatic gesture. It was a layered defensive architecture that exploited every geographic, technological, and economic advantage Iran possesses, refined over 4 decades of planning for exactly this scenario. Iran has the longest coastline of the 8 countries that border the Persian Gulf, and its exclusive economic zone in the Gulf is nearly twice the size of the next largest country. Iran operates 2 parallel naval forces, the regular Islamic Republic of Iran Navy and the IRGC Navy, which was assigned sole responsibility for the Persian Gulf in a 2007 reorganization. Both forces maintain bases on or near the strait. The IRGC Navy's entire organizational purpose, its training, its equipment, its doctrine, and its leadership structure has been built around one mission: denying passage through the Strait of Hormuz to any adversary at any cost. The strait is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The navigable shipping channels are even narrower, constrained by shallow waters, islands, and the curvature of the coastline. Iran's coast runs along the entire northern edge of the strait, giving the IRGC Navy line-of-sight access to every vessel that passes through. From concealed positions along the shoreline, from the islands of Keshem, Larak, and Hormuz itself, and from mobile coastal defense batteries that can be repositioned in hours, Iran deployed a layered defense of anti-ship cruise missiles, shore-based radar systems, fast attack boats armed with rockets and torpedoes, naval mines scattered across the shipping lanes, and waves of FPV and longer-range drones capable of striking targets tens of kilometers into the Gulf. The mines alone changed the calculus. The United States military intelligence reported that Iran had laid mines in the strait. The exact number remains classified, but the presence of even a small number of contact mines or modern influence mines in a confined waterway transforms the risk assessment for every ship captain and every insurance underwriter on Earth. War risk insurance premiums, which had already quadrupled before the strikes, were pulled entirely for transits after March 5th. Protection and indemnity coverage, without which no commercial vessel can legally operate, vanished overnight. It does not matter how many destroyers the U.S. Navy parks in the strait if no insurance company on Earth will cover a tanker transiting through mined waters. The economic kill switch was pulled not by the IRGC, but by the London insurance market, and no amount of American military power can override a Lloyd's of London risk assessment. The fast attack boats, the weapons system that Western analysts have dismissed for decades as asymmetric nuisances, proved devastatingly effective in the confined waters of the strait. These small, high-speed craft, many of them carrying anti-ship missiles or rocket launchers, can swarm from concealed positions along the Iranian coast, engage targets at close range where the defensive systems of large warships are least effective, and withdraw before a coordinated response can be mounted. During Operation Project Freedom, Iran launched these boats against American escorts and commercial vessels alike. The U.S. used Apache attack helicopters to destroy several of them, but the boats kept coming. Iran has hundreds of these craft. They are cheap, expendable, and operate from dispersed locations that cannot be eliminated by airstrikes without flattening the entire Iranian coastline. For every boat destroyed, another can be launched within hours. The drone campaign added another layer that American planners had underestimated. Iranian drones struck vessels throughout the Gulf, not just in the strait itself. A sea drone struck the oil tanker Sonangol Namib, anchored near Mubarak al-Kabir port in Kuwait, more than 800 kilometers from the strait, representing a massive expansion of the conflict zone. Drones hit oil facilities at the Fujairah oil industry zone in the UAE. The IRGC claims strikes on multiple tankers, including U.S.-linked vessels. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Center reported at least 41 incidents affecting vessels in and around the Arabian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman since late February. 41 incidents. That is not a nuisance. That is a sustained campaign of maritime denial that has made the entire Persian Gulf a war zone, not just the narrow strait. And then there is the toll system, the move that may have been the most strategically brilliant of all. After the initial closure, Iran did not keep the strait sealed to everyone. It opened a controlled transit corridor along the northern edge of the strait, near Larak Island, through Iranian territorial waters. Ships from countries Iran deemed friendly, including China, Russia, India, Iraq, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Thailand, were allowed to pass after IRGC inspection and payment. The tolls exceeded $1 million per vessel. Payments were assessed by the Revolutionary Guards in Chinese yuan. Iran had turned the Strait of Hormuz from an international waterway into a sovereign toll road, and the nations that paid were the nations that mattered most to the global economy. China, which receives a third of its oil through Hormuz, paid. India paid. The ships passed. The oil flowed, but only to the destinations Tehran approved, at the prices Tehran set, through the corridor Tehran controlled. The United States was left blockading Iranian ports, while Iran was collecting revenue from the very strait America could not open. Trump's response was a cascade of escalating threats, followed by retreats that each time diminished American credibility further. On March 9th, he falsely claimed that Iran's military had been destroyed and the strait was open. It was not. Tankers were still being attacked. Mines were still in the water. Insurance was still unavailable. On March 15th, he demanded that NATO and China help reopen the strait. NATO allies, including the United Kingdom and France, declined to join an American-led military operation, instead proposing their own separate multinational mission focused on de-escalation and freedom of navigation. China called for all parties to respect free transit, but deployed no naval assets and vetoed the Bahrain-drafted UN Security Council resolution that would have authorized military force. In late March, Trump repeatedly threatened to destroy Iran's infrastructure and civilization if the strait was not reopened, posting on Truth Social that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. A statement so extreme that the Secretary General of Amnesty International said it may constitute a threat to commit genocide. Multiple Democrats and even some right-wing commentators condemned the post. The White House denied considering nuclear weapons. Iran's Revolutionary Guards responded that the strait will not be opened to the enemies of this nation through the ridiculous spectacle by the President of the United States. Trump claimed that 158 Iranian naval vessels had been destroyed, asserting that only small, high-speed attack boats remained operational. The boats, the supposedly insignificant remnants, were the very platforms that continued to contest the strait against the full force of the U.S. Navy. On April 8th, a ceasefire was agreed. Iran was supposed to open the strait. It opened it on its own terms, with tolls exceeding $1 million per vessel, IRGC inspections, and controlled corridors through Iranian waters. Trump declared victory. The strait remained at 5% of pre-war traffic. The Islamabad talks on April 11 and 12, mediated by Pakistan, collapsed without agreement. Iran wanted the U.S. to lift sanctions, end the blockade, and cease all hostilities, including Israeli operations in Lebanon. Washington refused. On April 13, Trump imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports, deploying over 10,000 personnel and more than a dozen warships to seal Iran's coastline. Iran responded by reclosing the strait on April 18 and firing on 2 Indian-flagged ships that had received prior clearance to pass. On May 3rd, Trump launched Project Freedom. Iran fired cruise missiles at the operation on day one. On May 5th, Trump paused Project Freedom, citing progress in talks that by all accounts had stalled weeks earlier. Iranian state news agency INSA said Trump called off the operation following firm positions and warnings from Iran. State-run Tasnim described it as Trump backs down. The strait remains contested. 800 ships remain stranded. 20,000 sailors remain trapped. The numbers tell the story of an American military operation that has produced headlines, but not results. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz stands at roughly 5% of pre-war levels. Only 2 civilian vessels, both U.S.-flagged merchant ships, are known to have passed through the strait under American military escort before the operation was paused. Hapag-Lloyd, one of the world's largest container shipping companies, stated that its risk assessment remains unchanged and that transits through the strait are, for the moment, not possible for our ships. A maritime security analyst captured the core reality in a single sentence. Iran just needs to continue to present a perception of risk to keep merchant traffic to small numbers, essentially keeping Hormuz all but closed. Commercial confidence is the center of gravity, not military firepower. And commercial confidence is precisely what Iran has destroyed. No insurance company will cover a transit. No shipping line will authorize a voyage. No captain will sail through mined waters with drones overhead and fast attack boats on the flanks, regardless of how many American destroyers are in the vicinity. The U.S. Navy can protect its own ships. It cannot protect the global economy's willingness to use the strait. Brent crude remains above $100 a barrel. American gas prices have hit $4.46 a gallon, a level that directly impacts every household in the country. The International Energy Agency has characterized the disruption as the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency. India rationed cooking gas. Indonesia's fuel reserves dropped to 22 days. The European Central Bank raised its inflation forecast and cut GDP growth projections, warning of technical recession risk. The UN Secretary General warned that the crisis could push tens of millions into poverty and tip the world toward recession. Oil demand is falling at the fastest rate seen outside the COVID pandemic, as businesses and consumers cut consumption. The global economic damage from the Hormuz closure is measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Now let us examine what this means in the capitals that matter. In Moscow, the Hormuz crisis is a windfall. Russian oil, suddenly in higher demand as Gulf supplies dried up, has commanded premium prices. Every barrel that cannot leave the Gulf is a barrel of Russian crude that becomes more valuable. Putin has publicly warned against the blockade while privately celebrating its effects. In Beijing, the crisis has demonstrated the fragility of China's energy supply chain, but also revealed a pragmatic path. China paid Iran's tolls, transited the strait under IRGC escort, and continued importing Iranian crude throughout the war. Beijing is not happy about the disruption, but it has navigated it by working with Tehran rather than against it, a fact that Washington's sanctions campaign has not been able to change. In New Delhi, the crisis forced India to accept emergency waivers, ration fuel, and scramble for alternative supplies. But India, too, allowed its flagged vessels to transit the strait with Iranian permission. In European capitals, the energy shock has revived existential questions about dependence on Middle Eastern oil and the viability of supply chains that run through contested choke points. In Gulf capitals, the crisis has been catastrophic. With over 80% of caloric imports disrupted, oil production slashed, and economies cratered by a closure that their American security guarantor has been unable to reverse. First, the myth that American naval power can guarantee freedom of navigation through any waterway on Earth has been tested and found wanting. The United States Navy has not reopened the Strait of Hormuz after 67 days of trying. It has launched aerial campaigns, deployed thousands of personnel, imposed a full naval blockade, and announced a freedom operation that lasted 2 days before being paused. Iran, with a defense budget of approximately $25 billion, facing a military establishment that spends more than $800 billion, has maintained effective control of the strait through layered asymmetric defenses that exploit geography, technology, and the economics of maritime insurance. Second, the economic weapon of closing Hormuz has proven more powerful than any military response the United States has been able to mount. The strait closure has done more damage to the global economy than any single military operation since the 1973 oil embargo. It has demonstrated that in the 21st century, economic disruption is the ultimate weapon, and the nation that controls a choke point controls the conversation. Third, Iran's toll system revealed a strategic sophistication that Western analysts consistently underestimate. By selectively allowing friendly nations to pass while blocking Western-affiliated shipping, Tehran split the international coalition, maintained revenue, and demonstrated that it could operate the strait as a sovereign asset rather than a global commons. Fourth, Project Freedom's pause after 48 hours and 2 ships is the defining image of this crisis. It is not the image of a superpower projecting power. It is the image of a superpower discovering the limits of power in a 34-kilometer corridor defended by a nation that has nothing left to lose. Iran's foreign minister warned the United States to be wary of being dragged into a quagmire. That warning was not empty rhetoric. It was a precise description of what has already happened. The U.S. is simultaneously maintaining a naval blockade of Iranian ports, enforcing sanctions on Iranian oil buyers, flying over 100 aircraft daily over the strait, and trying to guide commercial ships through waters that remain mined, contested, and uninsurable. The operational tempo is unsustainable. The cost is measured in billions of dollars per month, and the result after 67 days is 2 merchant ships escorted through the strait and a presidential announcement of a pause. Fifth, the war has exposed a fundamental truth about asymmetric maritime warfare in the 21st century. A nation with shore-based anti-ship missiles, naval mines, fast attack boats, cruise missiles, and a drone fleet capable of striking targets 800 kilometers away does not need to defeat a carrier strike group in open combat. It needs only to make a 34-kilometer corridor too dangerous for commercial shipping to use. Insurance markets, not naval battles, determine whether a waterway is open, and Iran has won the insurance war decisively. The old myth is dying. The idea that one nation's navy could police any waterway, protect any shipping lane, and project force into any corner of the globe without consequence has collided with the reality of a 34-kilometer-wide strait lined with missiles, mines, drones, and fast attack boats operated by men who have spent 40 years preparing for exactly this moment. The Strait of Hormuz is not an American lake. It is not a Western commons. It is a contested space where geography, asymmetry, and willingness to absorb punishment have proven more decisive than tonnage, technology, and trillion-dollar budgets. Iran did not beat the United States Navy in a conventional engagement. It did something more consequential. It made the Strait of Hormuz ungovernable, uninsurable, and unusable. And no amount of American firepower has been able to change that fact. What do you think? Has Iran proven that asymmetric defense can defeat conventional naval power? Or will the United States eventually force the strait open? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this analysis opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a briefing. Until next time, stay sharp.